Transcript. Ayanna Williams sat on a wooden bench near the playground at Lincoln Park in Madison, Wisconsin. She tugged at her sweater sleeves, her gaze drifting between the children giggling on the swings and the leaves swirling across the grass. Her mom had said she would arrive in 10 minutes, but Ayanna didn't mind the wait. She appreciated the fresh air and the peaceful moments to herself. A few yards away, Karen Whitfield adjusted the strap of her purse, her eyes narrowing as she spotted Ayanna. She had seen the girl enter the park alone about 20 minutes earlier. Karen's mind churned with suspicion fueled by assumptions. She didn't pause to reflect. What is she doing here? She muttered to herself. Karen took a step closer, pulling out her phone. She glanced around as if seeking backup before holding the screen to her ear. Her voice, sharp and assertive, disrupted the park's tranquility. Yes, I'd like to report someone suspicious in Lincoln Park, she said to the dispatcher. It's a young girl sitting by herself. She's been here for a while, and I think someone should check it out. Ayanna looked up as Karen's voice resonated in the air. Their eyes met briefly, and Ayanna offered a polite smile, though her chest tightened with discomfort. Karen didn't smile back. Instead, she turned away, continuing her call with animated gestures. Minutes passed, and Ayanna tried to concentrate on the sounds of the park, the hum of cars on the nearby road, the chatter of families, the crunch of leaves beneath jogging shoes, all familiar and soothing. But Karen's gaze remained fixed on her. Ayanna felt its heaviness, invasive and weighing her down, as though she were being assessed for something she couldn't understand. The sound of distant sirens pierced the serene afternoon. Ayanna's head snapped toward the park entrance, her heart sinking as 2 police cars arrived. The officers stepped out with slow, deliberate movements, scanning the area until Karen waved them over. She pointed at Ayanna, her voice rising again. There she is, Karen said, pointing. I told you I don't think she belongs here. Ayanna's stomach twisted. What had she done? She shifted on the bench, uncertain whether to remain seated or walk away. Before she could decide, the officers approached her, their faces unreadable. Excuse me, miss, one of them said, his voice steady yet firm. Can we talk to you? Ayanna's voice quavered as she replied, I'm just waiting for my mom. I didn't do anything wrong. The officer glanced back at Karen, who stood with arms crossed, her expression a mix of triumph and validation. He sighed, motioning for Ayanna to stay seated. In that moment, Ayanna realized this wasn't about her actions. It was about Karen's perceptions of her. The truth of it stung more than any words could. The officers loomed over Ayanna, their presence casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. One had a notebook out, flipping it open with deliberate care. The other adjusted his utility belt, his eyes scanning the area before returning to Ayanna's face. What's your name, young lady? The taller officer asked. Ayanna, she said softly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She tried to keep her voice steady, but the knot in her throat made it challenging to speak. And what are you doing here? His tone was neutral but carried an edge, as if her explanation might not suffice. I'm waiting for my mom, Ayanna replied, her voice stronger now. She's on her way to pick me up. From behind them, Karen Whitfield interrupted, her voice rising again. She's been sitting here for at least half an hour. And she's been watching the playground. I don't know what her intentions are, but I thought it was better to be safe than sorry. Ayanna turned toward Karen, her jaw tightening. I wasn't watching the playground. I was just sitting here, minding my own business. The shorter officer glanced at Karen and then back at Ayanna. Do you have any identification? He asked. Ayanna frowned, confused. I'm 14. I don't carry ID. The taller officer sighed, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Do you have a phone? Can you call your mom? Ayanna hesitated before pulling out her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. The line rang twice before her mother answered. Hey, baby. Latasha Johnson's voice came through the speaker. It was calm, warm, and grounding. A lifeline Ayanna clung to in that moment. Mom, Ayanna said, her voice breaking slightly. There are police here asking me questions. Can you come now? There was a pause on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. I'm on my way, Latasha said, her tone suddenly clipped and focused. Don't move. Don't let them move you. The call ended, and Ayanna lowered her phone. She's coming, she said softly. The officers exchanged a glance. The shorter one stepped back, speaking quietly into his radio. The taller one remained, his eyes flicking toward Karen, who now stood with a self-satisfied expression. "I mean, you can't be too careful these days," Karen muttered, mostly to herself. "You just never know." Ayana's fists clenched at her sides, frustration simmering beneath her fear. The minutes dragged painfully, every sound around her amplified. The chirping of a bird, the rustle of leaves, the whispers of passers-by who had begun to notice the scene. Then, the sound of a vehicle pulling up shattered the tension. A sleek black SUV rolled to a stop just beyond the police cruisers. The driver's door opened, and Latasha Johnson stepped out. She wasn't just Ayana's mother. She was the mayor of Madison, Wisconsin, and her expression was one of barely restrained anger. Latasha Johnson's heels clicked sharply against the pavement as she strode toward the group. Her presence was commanding, her fitted blazer and calm intensity silencing the murmurs of onlookers. Ayana stood quickly, relief flooding over her, but her mother's attention was fixed on the officers and Karen Whitfield. "What's happening here?" Latasha demanded, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the tension. Her gaze shifted from the taller officer to Karen. "Why are you questioning my daughter?" The officer straightened slightly, clearing his throat. "Ma'am, we received a call about a suspicious individual in the park. We were just—" Latasha raised a hand, halting him mid-sentence. "Suspicious?" she repeated, her tone heavy with incredulity. What exactly made her suspicious? Sitting on a bench, existing in a public park? Karen stepped forward, her confidence wavering under Latasha's gaze. "Look, I didn't mean any harm," she began, her voice defensive. "I just— his life. I didn't recognize her, and she was sitting there alone for a while. I thought it was strange." "Strange?" Latasha's eyebrows shot up. "You saw a black teenager sitting alone in a park and decided she was a threat? Do you realize how dangerous that assumption is?" Karen's face flushed, and she glanced at the ground, mumbling something unintelligible. Latasha turned her attention back to the officers. "You," she said, addressing the taller one. "When you arrived, did you assess the situation objectively, or did you immediately affirm this woman's unfounded fears? Did you stop to consider if this was racial profiling?" The officer opened his mouth to respond but seemed at a loss for words. His partner stepped forward, attempting to defuse the situation. "Ma'am, we were just following protocol. We're here to ensure everyone's safety." Latasha's expression hardened. "Safety? My daughter wasn't a threat to anyone. But thanks to this woman's prejudice and your unquestioning response, she now feels unsafe in a place where she has every right to be." She stepped closer to Ayana, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. Ayana, who had remained silent, finally spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. "I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was just waiting for you." Latasha's jaw tightened, and she looked at Karen one last time. "You owe my daughter an apology," she said, her words heavy with finality. Karen hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for an excuse. But under the weight of Latasha's unwavering stare and the murmurs of the crowd that had now gathered, she finally relented. I'm sorry," she muttered, barely above a whisper. "That's not enough," Latasha replied, her voice icy. "You need to think long and hard about why you saw her as a threat. This isn't just about today. It's about the patterns of bias that lead to moments like this. Bias that could have cost my daughter her life." The crowd grew quiet, the gravity of Latasha's words settling over them. The officers stepped back, visibly chastened. "Consider this your wake-up call," Latasha said, her gaze sweeping over Karen and the officers. "We need to do better, all of us." She turned to Ayana, her voice softening. "Let's go, sweetheart." As they walked toward the SUV, Ayana felt a mixture of relief, pride, and lingering frustration. Her mother had stood up for her in a way that few people could, but the sting of what had just happened would not be easily forgotten. The incident at Lincoln Park didn't stay confined to that quiet afternoon. By the next day, it was the talk of the town. Videos recorded by onlookers had spread like wildfire on social media, showing Mayor Latasha Johnson confronting the police and Karen Whitfield. The hashtags #Lincoln Park Incident and #Bias Awareness trended for days. At City Hall, reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions at Latasha as she entered the building. Inside her office, the phone rang incessantly. Supporters praised her decisive actions, while critics questioned her motives, accusing her of overreacting. Latasha, however, remained composed. She called for a press conference, determined to address the incident directly. The room was packed when she stepped up to the podium, flanked by community leaders and Ayana, who stood quietly by her side. What happened yesterday was a stark reminder of the biases that still permeate our society, Latasha began, her voice steady but charged with emotion. My daughter Ayana was sitting in a park, enjoying her afternoon, when she became the target of suspicion, simply because someone decided she didn't belong. She paused, letting the weight of her words resonate. This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern that countless individuals face every day. But yesterday, it happened to my daughter, and I refused to let it go unnoticed. The audience was silent, the tension in the room palpable. Ayana shifted slightly, feeling the eyes of the room on her. Her mother continued, her voice growing firmer with each sentence. We can't afford to ignore the damage these biases cause, not just to individuals, but to the fabric of our community. That's why I'm announcing the implementation of comprehensive anti-bias training for all city employees, including our police force. This isn't a perfect solution, but it's a necessary step toward building a more inclusive and just city. The announcement sparked a mix of reactions. Some clapped enthusiastically, while others whispered among themselves. A reporter raised her hand. Mayor Johnson, do you believe this training will prevent incidents like this in the future? Latasha met the reporter's gaze. Training alone won't erase centuries of systemic inequality, she replied. But it's a start. What matters most is that we commit to this work every day, not just when incidents like this make headlines. Karen Whitfield's name had also spread across social media, and the backlash was swift. Friends and neighbors confronted her, asking why she had called the police on a teenager sitting in a park. Karen issued a public statement apologizing, claiming she hadn't intended harm, but her words rang hollow to many. At Lincoln High School, Ayana returned to her classes with a mixture of apprehension and determination. She found herself at the center of conversations she hadn't anticipated. Her peers asked her about the incident, their curiosity tinged with shock. Teachers awkwardly avoided the subject, unsure how to address it. In one of her classes, Ayana's history teacher, Mr. Daniels, finally broke the silence. Ayana, he said gently, if you're comfortable, I think it's important for all of us to learn from what you've experienced. Would you like to share anything? Ayana hesitated, glancing around the room. Then, with a deep breath, she began to speak. I didn't ask for this to happen, she said, her voice steady but low. But it did. And it made me realize how often people like me have to prove they belong somewhere. That's not fair, and it's not right. Her words hung in the air, her classmates listening intently. Ayana had always been quiet, but now her voice carried weight. Weeks passed, and the ripple effects of the Lincoln Park incident began to manifest across Madison. Mayor Latasha Johnson's anti-bias training initiative rolled out quickly, starting with city employees and law enforcement. The program included workshops, personal bias assessments, and community forums where citizens could openly share their experiences. The first forum was held at the Madison Public Library, and it drew a diverse crowd. Ayana attended with her mother, sitting quietly as others spoke about their encounters with bias. An older man shared how he'd been followed in stores his entire life. A young woman described being overlooked at her workplace despite her qualifications. The stories were different, yet they shared a common thread of pain and resilience. When it was Ayana's turn, she hesitated. The memory of that day was still raw, but she knew her voice mattered. Standing up, she looked out at the room, her hands slightly trembling. I didn't think something like this could happen to me, she began. I was just sitting in the park, waiting for my mom. But, in a matter of minutes, I went from feeling safe to feeling like I didn't belong, like I was a problem. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. It shouldn't matter who my mom is. No one should have to feel that way. And I hope that by sharing my story, we can start to change that for everyone. The room erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the space. Ayana sat down, her cheeks flushed, but her heart lighter. Meanwhile, Karen Whitfield remained in the background, avoiding public appearances. Her apology had done little to stem the criticism she faced. But in private, she began attending the forums as well, sitting quietly in the back. Though she never spoke, her presence was noted, and perhaps it was the beginning of her own reflection. Madison began to change in small but meaningful ways. Police officers participated in community events, engaging with residents beyond their uniforms. Schools incorporated lessons about implicit bias into their curriculums, giving students the tools to understand and combat prejudice. At Lincoln High, Ayanna became an unexpected leader. Her classmates encouraged her to join the school's debate team, where she discovered a talent for articulating ideas and challenging others' perspectives. Her first topic: the impact of racial bias in everyday life. One day after a debate practice, Ayanna and her mom sat together in their living room. Latasha looked over at her daughter, pride shining in her eyes. You know, she said, I always knew you had a voice. I just didn't know the world would hear it this soon. Ayanna smiled, leaning her head against her mom's shoulder. I just want things to get better, she said softly. For everyone. Latasha wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. They will, she said firmly. Because of people like you. In the months that followed, the mural on the side of the Lincoln Community Center was completed. It depicted a vibrant scene of unity, with children of all races playing together, surrounded by symbols of hope and justice. In the corner, a young girl with a book in her hand and a determined expression gazed out at the viewer. Ayanna recognized the likeness immediately and felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't asked to become a symbol of change, but she accepted the role gracefully, because she knew that her story wasn't just hers. It was part of a much larger fight for equality and understanding. As the mural was unveiled, Ayanna stood beside her mother, surrounded by the community that had rallied behind them. The cheers and applause filled the air, a testament to the power of resilience and the willingness to grow. The incident at Lincoln Park had been painful, but it had also become a spark, a moment that ignited conversations, actions, and a collective commitment to do better. And Ayanna, with her quiet strength, had helped light the way.